Hello, this is Deborah Clay, author of The Borrowed Boy and Just Be, and presenter of Castaway Books. Each week I invite an author to tell me about the books that have inspired their life and influenced their writing. This week's guest is Karen Heenan. Hello, I'm delighted to welcome Karen Heenan, author of Songbird and Wider World. And the reason I'm particularly excited to be chatting with Karen is because Karen's a regular participant of my tweet chat on a Friday Salon, and I love meeting my friends from Friday Salon in person. And I've just finished reading Songbird, which I absolutely loved. It's a very accomplished debut. Can't believe it is a debut. And I'm really looking forward to reading Wider World because I understand it's about one of the characters, Robin, who featured a little in Songbird, and it's his story. So very excited, Karen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And I'm very excited since my entire intro was basically praise, and how can I go wrong from there? You're giving people an awfully good impression.
Well, I like sharing good authors because finding a good author is great. And your writing reminds me of, although it's different in terms of the kind of storyline, but C.J. Sampson, because I love the Shard Lake series. They're both his books and yours are set in Tudor time, but it's the way that you write. It's just totally immerses you in that era with really believable characters that you just grow to love. So, yeah, as I say, hard to believe it's a debut.
I've read a few of his books, but I've actually not made it through the whole series yet because I'm afraid of them distracting me from what I'm writing if I'm in the same time period. But now that I'm working on something out of the Tudor period, I can get back to him because he's not going to distract me from the 1930s.
No, quite. But I envy you because as soon as his book comes out, I buy the hardback straight away because I love them. But I think he's finished Shard Lake now, unfortunately.
I think so. I'm hoping to stick with my Tudor series through the end of Elizabeth. I'm not really a plotter. The third book is finished and will be out next April. And there's hazy ideas for a fourth one, but it hasn't come together yet.
Oh, exciting. So I'll have to, gives me time to catch up by reading A Wider World before this third one comes out. Excellent. Okay, so shall we go on first of all to your first book?
Okay. My first book is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith, which I read for the first time probably when I was 10 or 11. I took it out of my mom's bookshelf. It was my first, adult historical novel. And my mom, well, she never had a problem with anything that I read. She basically thought if I couldn't understand it, I'd get it later. And if I did understand it, she might have to explain a few things. But Tree Grows in Brooklyn it's still something I read every few years because it's one of those books that changes with you as you grow. When I was a kid and I read it, I had recently lost my father. So the main character, Francie, is very close to her dad, and she loses him tragically partway through the book. And it was the first time I realized the power of a good, ugly cry. Mm. Reading her father's death scene, and then later when she gets graduation flowers with a note from him that he had thought to give to her aunt because he knew he wasn't going to live that long. Oh. I wailed loud enough to bring my mom in from another room.
Oh.
Really? And part of me, I wanted to know how that was done because I'm an easy cry anyway. I'll tear up at a good commercial, but that was just wailing. And I like I said, I reread it because it's one of those books that changes as I grow and as my understanding grows. When I was a kid, I was really sympathetic to, the daughter, of course, because she was my age, and her affection for her father. But I was never very fond of the mother because she was tough on everybody. And as an adult, I read it and realize, of course, she was tough on everybody. She was trying to hold this family together. Mm-hmm. And she didn't have the bandwidth, basically, to be warm and affectionate and try to keep everything afloat. I love a book that travels with you as you do.
That's really interesting. I've heard a friend told me when she read Anna, I can't say the name, Say it for me. Anna
Karenina?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
the one.
that one.
When she watched the film, that each time at different stages of growing into a woman, she identified with the different characters and had different thoughts about them.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting. But Karen, you say you lost your father when you were very young. I mean, I should think that wailing was releasing the emotion about your father.
A lot of it probably was because my mother was not the mom from the book, but she didn't want to see a lot of emotion because she was holding her own. And she's like, if you cry, I'll cry. And I'm not crying anymore. We cried. So I cried on relatives when I had them around, or I cried over particularly tragic Barbie games I made up. There were a lot of lingering illnesses, and I was always a sucker for a book that would make me cry, because that was like, justifiable tears. Oh, it's a sad book, see?
Yeah. But perhaps your mother felt that she couldn't cry in front of you as her daughter because she had to appear strong for you.
She was a little bit of that, but she told me later on in life that she always put things in little compartments, and she was going to go on to the next thing because sad didn't do her any good.
Yeah.
And therapy might have done her a little good.
Times have changed, though, haven't they?
They have.
From our parents, it was a bit of the, certainly in Britain, the stiff upper lip, and you get on with it, especially after the war and everything. Not that my parents or your parents were products of the war, but their parents were, so they came up with that upbringing. So I think the whole era of therapy, counselling, understanding and getting in tune with your emotions came perhaps with our generation, and they didn't have that luxury.
No, they didn't. But I did get books from both of them, so that makes up for a lot of other things. My mom was always a huge reader, and one of my earliest memories having to do with books is going in to ask her something and getting I'm almost done. Unless you're bleeding, let me finish my chapter. And I wasn't mad. All I wanted to do was find out where she went. And I needed to learn how to read so I could, show her the hand. And my dad was the complete opposite. He was a lot older than my mom. He was born in 1912. My mom was born in 1932. So he left school in 6th grade. He could read, but it was never anything that he did for pleasure. But he liked that my mom read, and as soon as I was born, the house was filled with kids' books. He would go out and buy me books, and my mom would read them because my dad wasn't comfortable, but he would sit me down and he would open a book of fairy tales and he would just make stuff up. Yeah. And I wish I'd known at the time that they were all out of his head, because I went looking later on for these fractured fairy tales that he told me, and they didn't exist. He just pulled characters from different stories that he remembered and things his parents had told him growing up. And I don't remember them clearly, but I still feel like I got something really special with those.
How wonderful.
And he pretended he was reading to me. And then as soon as I learned, he made me read to him.
Oh, wonderful.
So, yeah, I got practice, and he got to really feel that, he'd helped to push me into this, even though he wasn't that literate himself.
He'd be so proud of you to know you turned out to be an author.
Probably proud and a little confused, but I'll take that.
And is your mother still with you?
No, she died in 2000. I should know this, 2006.
Oh.
Not long after I met, not long after I met my husband. We had been dating for about 6 months at that point, I guess.
It's good that he met her.
He hadn't.
Oh, he didn't?
No, because she lived in upstate New York, so I hadn't gotten up to see her until things got really bad. And then I caught a ride up with a friend, but he went up with me a few weeks after she died, when my stepdad got her ashes back, and he experienced the rest of my family. My uncle taking the ashes up onto the hill, opening the bag and saying, "You always wanted to travel, you old bat." And he comes from normal people. And he looked at me and I'm like, this is who we are.
Oh, lovely. But you're an only child, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah, my parents had been married for 10 years when I came along.
Wow.
Not sure if I was an oops or if that just took some convincing over time. I was never enlightened on that fact.
Wow. Did you feel that your parents were? I asked this because our daughter's an only child, and we had her about 5 or 6 years after we were married. We were very, very close, and I just wondered sometimes whether she felt as if not having siblings and us being very close as a couple, how she felt about that, whether it made her feel, I don't know, outside, or I don't know. What was your experience?
I liked it for the most part. I think it was probably one of the reasons I became such a reader, because I did find other people in there if I didn't always have them around. And my dad died when I was 9. So my mom and I had 6 years together before she remarried. And it was very good and also a little dysfunctional being your mom's best friend from the ages of 9 to 16.
Yeah, yeah.
Learned a lot. She made a lot of my mistakes for me, for which I am grateful that I didn't have to. But the only time I really ever wished for siblings was when she got older. And it would have been nice to have been able to divide her up with somebody else who could have taken some of that full strength mom.
I've said to my daughter, because my daughter's decided not to have children, she's 31 now, but I'm one of 4 children, and I'm the only one who's had a family, and I've only got one daughter. So she was spoiled by all her aunties and uncles growing up, but she's going to be payback time when we all get old.
Yes, she's going to have a house full.
Poor girl.
Well, I should talk. I mean, my husband and I look at each other occasionally and go, yeah, what are we going to
do? Did you have children? I can't remember.
No. I thought about it and never wanted to do it on my own. And when I was of an age where I would have thought it was a good idea, there wasn't a relationship that I wanted to share that experience with, or that I wanted to remain in my life for that much longer. So no, and I don't really regret it. I'm happy. I've gotten to do a lot more traveling than I probably ever would have, and probably also a lot more writing.
And your books are your children.
They are
your legacy.
My books and my cats, though I'm down to 1 now.
Oh,
I had 12 at my peak.
Did you?
Yes. Actually, I briefly had 13, and that was only because Philadelphia's legal limit for indoor animals was 12. So I had to have an extra one for a brief time just to be bullheaded about it. But then my other animals didn't like him and he moved on.
Gosh, it's a lot of cats.
It was, but it was a big house then, and there was room for them.
Right.
We downsized on cats first because everybody came in pretty much at the same time. So when we moved a few years ago, we only had 4 left. And we've been here 3.5 years, and now we're down to just Harriet.
And will you get any more after?
After Harriet, yes. I've auditioned getting a few cats now, and she's 18, and she says no.
Okay.
She says no very clearly.
Yeah.
And cats can be very clear about their displeasure. So I'm not pushing that.
She thinks, at last, I've got the house to myself, and she's thinking of bringing in more.
Yeah, she outlived everybody else. There's got to be some reward.
Absolutely. So shall we go on to book number 2?
Okay. Book 2 is also one that I discovered as a child. Despite not being a big fan of series books, this was a series I discovered when I was in grade school. They were the Betsy Tacy books by Maud Hart Lovelace, and the one that I chose is actually Betsy and the Great World. The book started out, there were 4 books with these friends in grade school, and then there were 4 books in high school, one Betsy and the Great World, and then a final book of her wedding and young married life going into World War I. So first of all, historical again, I found that love early, and it never quite left me. But it was also the earlier books, it was a really good sense of place, and it was a wonderful development of these female friendships that, even though they don't appear in the Great World book, are part of who the character is by that point. And it starts out, she wants to be a writer, another point in her favor, but she didn't do well at college, and her parents decide to give her a year in Europe. This is pre-war, I think 1912 or 13. and to give her a year in Europe to try to see the world, get herself together. And I loved the fact that a girl in that era from a sheltered town, from a small family that didn't have a lot, could do that, could, get on a ship and travel to Europe and go to places where she didn't know the language. And it was kind of a goal. I just looked at that and I'm like, that's what I'm going to do someday. And I remember in junior high writing a paper about some place that I wanted to travel and describing one of the towns from that book. And they thought I'd been there. And I'm like, not yet. And one of the places she visited was Venice, which had always been on my list because I saw Summertime with Katharine Hepburn when I was young, and some kids wanted to go to Disney. I wanted to go to Venice because that just seemed as magical to me.
It is. I love Venice. My favorite places in the world.
Yeah.
And
it's that was one of the places that she went. And then the book ended in London, which was the first place I did go on my own, because that seemed like a logical starting place, foreign, but I wouldn't have to deal with the language barrier. I wasn't sure if I was that brave.
Now, when I read, when you were telling me about that before we got to meet here, I was interested because I hadn't traveled abroad at all until I was 19. And my first ever trip was from UK to Los Angeles on Freddie Laker's SkyTrain. So like you, opposite ways, I went bam all the way to LA. And like you, I kind of just went off without giving much notice. I just sort of said, I'm just going to do it. And I did. I just got a standby ticket and everything, queued up, jumped on, and off I went. So tell me your story, because yours was a bit like that, wasn't it?
It was. My mom had remarried by high school, and they were very overprotective of me. And I wanted to travel, and I'd never been anywhere other than like car trips with the family. We'd never flown anywhere. My mom was petrified of the idea of flying. And I started working right out of high school. I got a secretarial job at an insurance company. And about 2 blocks from my office, there was an American Express office. And I would cruise in there at lunchtime and look at the travel brochures and ask questions. And we were also really close to the passport office. And one day I took a long lunch. I went across the way and applied for a passport. And then I went and bought an airline ticket to London. And I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want them to talk me out of it. And I didn't want them to make me overthink it. And I didn't tell anybody until the day before I left.
Whoa. And how old were you?
I had just turned 19.
Yeah, same as me.
And I even went to work that day because I wanted to make sure I had, this was in the era of like traveler's checks and things. I wanted to make sure that I could pay for what I was doing. So I took my bag to work and I figured out how to get to the airport from Center City, Philadelphia, little dinky bus that stopped far too many places. And I almost missed my plane. And I didn't even have a hotel room when I got there.
Oh,
I had one of those, I forget who the company was, but it was the like London on $20 a day books.
Yeah.
And I figured out old British payphones in the airport, and I called bed and breakfasts until I found one that had a room, and took the tube into London and spent the entire time convincing myself I wasn't quite as terrified as I thought I was. But even if I was going to do it anyway.
Wow. Good job you arrived at a decent hour. I suppose
yeah,
the tube's running. Yeah.
It was fairly early in the morning, but by the time I'd gotten through customs and got a coffee and sat there and kind of hyperventilated quietly and went, okay, the hard part is over. The plane didn't go down. Now you just have to find a place to stay. And it's early. You've got until afternoon before they're going to really start, cutting off you showing up with a bag looking pathetic.
But you must have been very, very tired.
Yeah, I was. I hadn't actually thought about jet lag.
Yeah. I tell you, when I was a bit older, 21, this happened. So I enjoyed my stop at the States, and then I went back a couple of more times because I just fell in love with it and I was traveling around. And on one of those travels, I'd met a guy whose name truly was Kenneth Cabbage, KC, that was his name. And he lived in Arizona. And I'd met him on traveling. And when I got back, he was my pen pal, but he wrote to me and said to me, look, he sent me $100 check and said, come out and see me and visit me. And I wasn't going to, and I didn't use it. But then I finished college and all my friends had gone off and I wanted an adventure. So I thought, oh, what the heck? I'm just going to surprise him and visit him. So I packed up my rucksack. I didn't tell my mum and dad till the morning I was going. I was living in London in a bedsit. And I thought, oh, I'm just going to do what I did before. I'm just going to get standby, get on spec. So I left. And in those days, you could just get standby into Connect Flights and Freddie Baker. And I did all that. But when I got to Tucson, Arizona, stupid girl, it was about 2 a.m. and I realized I only had the PO box number and I didn't have his address. It's about 21, I don't know, just standing in the early hours of the morning in Tucson with nothing but a PO number. And I reckon this was an absolute angel, a little miracle, because I was just said to the taxi driver, I don't know, I'm going to Bisbee and I don't know, I only know his name. And there's this black guy behind me in the queue, and Bisbee and Tucson are about 3 hours apart. I mean, they're not close by. It's a long journey, 2 hours, I don't know, it's a really long way. And the young guy behind me in the queue said, you're going to Bisbee? He said, who are you looking for? And I said, KC. And he goes, hey, I know KC. I'll go with you. I'll tell you where he lives. And he did. That had to be some angel sent in my path.
The stuff we do when we're that age.
My daughter, she's a bit like you were saying about your mother made all the mistakes. I used to tell my daughter all sorts of things about my growing up, and she never did anything stupid. And when she got older, she said to me, well, when I heard all the stories of the silly things you did, I thought I'm never going to be as stupid as my mother. So
well, if she's anything like me, she just did other stupid things. My mother would have never gone to another country and decided to just see the world on her own.
Yeah. She probably, I'm sure she has done other things, but I don't really want to know what they are any more than I ever told my mum about my adventures. Oh, thank goodness.
Were awful.
I know, here to tell the tale though.
Yes.
So shall we go on to your third book?
Yes. Number 3, and there's probably a little Stephen King on a lot of people's lists, and it's not on writing, though I did love that one. Mm-hmm. I'm going with The Shining, which I found as a brand new library book when it just came out, and it thoroughly scared the crap out of me. And I grew up on horror movies. My mom loved them, and that was something I watched a lot when I was a kid. The only one that really ever bothered me was The Exorcist, which I saw when I was 10, and I was way too close to the main character's age for that not to get me. But The Shining, I read it and it was frightening, but it was also one of the first times that I think I looked at a book as a technical project and tried to figure out why it worked so well and why it worked so well on me when that wasn't something I generally like to read. But I think it really came down to, I don't read a lot of him these days, but I do still read some Stephen King, and it's always the characters. I figured out from him and from a few other authors whose genres I don't read that if you can sell me on the person you're writing about, I will pretty much follow them anywhere. And with King, it's the people and it's his pacing. He never really slows down enough for you to go, oh, I'm not sure if I even like this kind of book, because you're constantly looking to see what the next thing is that's going to happen.
That's clever writing. What do you think it is that makes us connect with a character? What is it the author does that makes us connect with that character?
That's one I'm still trying to figure out, because I'm not a writer who, I don't always know a lot about my people when I start out writing. I end up knowing a lot, and then that's what the editing process is for, is going back out and fleshing them out with all these things I've discovered by the end of their story. Usually in the beginning, I start with a situation and figure out who that situation would be interesting to happen to. Mm-hmm. And then I have to go into, well, how is it going to affect them all along? basically what I told a friend recently is the first question I ask my characters is, what hurt you, honey?
Mm. Mm.
And, there's got to be something that gets me inside their heads, whether it's my people or a book that I'm reading.
Mm.
And I know some people do all this character work up and they have questionnaires and they have these character Bibles. And I do a lot of that work afterward. Like I have probably a 50-page document now on all of the characters in my tutor books, because they seem to keep appearing and reappearing in each other's stories. And I need to remember where and when and what's happened to them in the interim that hasn't been mentioned.
Mm. Mm. I know what you mean. I'm working on a new novel at the moment, and the character, I know the story, but I didn't know who my characters were. And then as I start writing and thinking, I can kind of feel them here in my heart. Suddenly you just know them, you kind of recognize them, and they start talking to you, and
Yeah.
they become real. And you can't do it. It's different parts of your brain, I think. You can't logically say the character's this. You have to go to a place where you feel that character.
Yes.
And then they start to come out onto the page. And the more you love that character and spend time with them, the easier it gets, the more it comes out in your writing, don't you think?
And it also makes you love characters who you wouldn't necessarily. I mean, like my second book, A Wider World, features a character who was nobody's favorite in Songbird.
I felt sorry for him. I thought he meant well.
He did. He was not, Robin is not good at peopling at all. But that was part of my challenge in A Wider World, was finding out why he wasn't good at peopling and why he did some of the dumb things he did. And he has ended up by far as my favorite character.
I tend to write about people who are on the edges of society, just because of my work in health, social care, etc. Those are the people whose voices I often have in my head still, the people who feel excluded from society for whatever reason. So they do tend to come into my stories. Well, in both my books, Borrowed Boy and Just Be, the protagonists were people who my writers group, when they started reading them, kept on telling me they didn't like. And it really upset me, like they're telling me they don't like somebody I'm very close to. And but then I found that when I got my reviews for my books, that people all said that they came to love them. And I always feel like people are judged so too easily in real life, aren't they? People are judged if they don't
on just that first chapter.
And if you can't recognize yourself in a person, this is our nature. If we can't recognize ourselves in a person, we can't identify with that person because it's not our experience, we start to judge them, which is kind of why I like to write about people who might feel judged in the real world, so that they have a voice and you can empathize and spend more time with them, so you love them.
And you see them and understand them better, because it's a lot easier, I think, to give people space to develop themselves in a book than maybe spend time with somebody who you've already made a snap judgment about.
Yeah.
If the writing is good, you'll continue on with the book, even as you're not quite sure about the character. And it's like, if you tell me a good story, I'll keep going.
my protagonists are both wonderful women, so I will have nothing said bad about them. Okay. So when you were reading The Shining, what stage of your life was that?
That was probably junior high. I'd started writing in grade school. I had a wonderful 6th grade teacher who was, she was actually an ex-nun. She left the convent, got married, had half a dozen kids, and then started teaching 6th grade, because apparently her own children were not enough. And she was the one who, we would have like this, I don't know if they do anything similar in Britain, but we would have what they called the Scholastic Book Fair. It was like a book catalog, and we were allowed to order one book from it. And she always sort of snuck me in her extra classroom credits so I could get more books. And we were only supposed to take one book out of the school library every week, which I thought was criminal because I could eat that in a day. So she would let me return my books and get other books out and not tell on me. And she would correct my writing in a different way than she did the other students. Like, she taught me about, dialogue and quotation marks and things like that before we'd really dealt with that level of grammar and stuff. I mean, Philadelphia public schools were not fabulous on some of the rules, but I think I basically learned all of my grammar and writing rules from reading. I've just absorbed over the years, and I can't tell you why something's right or wrong, but I'll defend it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I picked up The Shining probably, I'm going to say 7th or 8th grade.
Mm. What age is that? I never
13, 14.
Okay. I think your grades are different to ours. I don't know. Well, it's probably the same now. When I was at school, we didn't have 7th and 8th, but they do now. But I have to still get my head around it. So when did you know that you were going to be a writer, or have the aspiration to be a writer?
It was something I'd always wanted to do, but I just always assumed it would be in addition to doing something else.
Mm.
But it was like a lot of the other artistic or creative things I was interested in, you either needed money or talent. I mean, I wanted to be a ballerina. I was a klutz, and dance lessons cost money.
I did too.
So also, I didn't really realize until I was probably 8 or 9 that just anybody could take dance lessons. You know, I thought you had to be like some special breed of super person who was born graceful and who could get up on their toes. And I was really offended when I found out that I'd missed out. But I also walked into doors on a regular basis, so maybe not. And, you know, art was another one. I like to draw, I like to paint, but that seemed even less likely to make a career for me than writing would, because you really have to do that for somebody else. You know, I still draw for my own satisfaction, but I was never good enough at that it didn't irritate me. But writing just seemed the easiest one, because all I needed was pen, paper, and a lot of books to read, because I figured I could learn it if I read enough. And, you know, you write in a lot of different authors' voices when you're learning that way. I have a lot of drafts that sound like Stephen King and sound like various other people who I, you know, read a ton of. But eventually you settle into your own voice, but it takes, you know, a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. You do crafting as well, don't you?
Yeah, as an only child, I'm not good without a project in my hands. So I started sewing at an early age. I make most of my own clothes. I make some of my husband's. And I stopped, I spent 30 years in a cubicle as a legal secretary.
Oh.
And I left that 7 or 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Just decided couldn't do it anymore. The writing and the craft work were all therapy because I hated my job so much. And I just decided maybe I should try to enjoy the therapy and make money off of it instead of trying to balance out my misery with it. Mm. So up until COVID, I did a lot of craft shows and some online sales, and I still pick up some legal temp work here and there. Mm. And I'm still waiting for writing to actually become something that resembles an income, but I know it's a long game. You know, yeah. Nothing's going to sell the first book like the second one or the third. And it's something I always wanted, something I always did anyway. And it's something that if publishing vanished tomorrow, I would still do.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Well done. Okay. So shall we go on to your fourth book, isn't it?
My fourth book is kind of a twofer. I got a little greedy there.
But they're related. They are related.
They are. And one definitely led to the other and really became part of a lifestyle. The first book is Prodigal Summer by Barbara Kingsolver. I like almost all of her books, though I think I'm probably the only person who's read it who didn't love The Poisonwood Bible.
Oh, you didn't?
That was my least favorite of all of her books.
I love all of her books. Just love her, adore her. Mm.
But Prodigal Summer is another one that's a comfort read. I read every few years, just usually when August or September rolls around and nature is just getting overabundant around me. I feel the need for that one. It was just, I liked the characters, even the ones who were a little borderline unlikable because you understood them. Mm. But I really liked how she portrays the natural world. And it's not something I had thought a lot about, because my nose is either in a computer or a book or a sewing machine. And it made me think a lot more about just what was going on in the world outside of me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was never an outdoorsy kid, and I grew up into a fairly non-outdoorsy adult, at least until a year or two after that. I bought my first house, and it had a front yard and a decent sized backyard for a city house. And I decided if I had dirt, I needed a garden.
Mm-hmm.
And at first it was flowers in the front, and I had no idea what to do in the back. And then I read her book, Animal Vegetable Miracle, which is a memoir of moving her family from Arizona to a family property in West Virginia, and basically learning to be self-sufficient. And really, getting into just, we all know about how far our food travels to get to us, but she really made it interesting, and she made it sound like something that you could actually achieve, to try to live more thoughtfully and more seasonally with your foods. And by the time we left West Philadelphia and moved to the burbs, I actually had a thriving vegetable garden and several chickens, which were also not legal. But that was the fun again. It was like, I'm going to be a rebel and have illegal chickens in my backyard, because with all the things that happen in Philadelphia, really, you're going to come after my illegal poultry?
Do you still have chickens?
I don't right now. I rehomed them before we moved, because we moved at the end of February.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to try setting up, because it actually turned out to be a really rough winter, and we had snowstorms before we moved and immediately after. And I found a friend with like a little urban farm setup, and she took my chickens.
Uh-huh.
So we've been here 3.5 years, and I'm finally working on the back portion of our yard, where when we moved in, there were a couple of enormous shrubs that took up the whole back portion. And once those are out, I'm going to build a new chicken coop and put in a run back there.
But have you managed to still have freshly laid eggs? Because all my eggs come from my friends' chickens, and I would hate to go back to supermarket eggs.
I have, it's about half and half. I get some at the farmer's market. I do have a neighbor with chickens that she gives me some occasionally. And then sometimes, there are supermarket eggs, and I try not to look as closely at those, because they're not orange and they don't taste the same way. The color difference. The first time I looked at fresh eggs, it was like, this is a whole different food.
It is really bright orange. And when you make a cake with them, the sponge is beautifully, it's vibrant, isn't it? It's lovely.
I started making a lot of quiche when I had chickens. Which was not something I'd made a lot of before, but I'm like, I have all these eggs, I need to do something with them.
Yeah.
And right now I don't have chickens, but I did a small batch of canned tomatoes this morning. I'm just trying to do a little bit every day so that I don't boil myself in my little kitchen.
I was going to say, because you're on Twitter, you were showing your harvest of cherry tomatoes, look, masses of them. And I was surprised when you said canning. I know in America you do lots of canning. I have my cherry tomatoes, I open freeze them, and then I put them in bags in the freezer, or I just slow roast them and put them in spaghetti or puree them. But I don't know people that can tomatoes in England, but I'm sure people will tell me otherwise. Do you actually use cans, or are they jars?
No, it's jars. We've just always called it canning. I think some of the English fiction I've read sometimes do you call it bottling instead?
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, they are glass.
Tomatoes. I haven't met anybody who's done it with tomatoes here. I've met people who have slow roasted them in the oven, and I've made green tomato chutney, which I've made, but I've not. So with your tomatoes, you just sort of put them in a pickle or something, do you?
No, they're cooked down into tomato sauce. And then just jarred that way. And I do it a fairly basic sauce, because I just do it in a big, they call it a water bath. It's a big like soup stock pot that you can cover the jars with water and then cook them, so that way they seal and that keeps the bacteria out. But it's a very basic tomato sauce with just a little bit of salt and some lemon juice to make sure that the acidity stays up. And then later on, I can use it for a base in soup, or I can cook it to thicken it up a little more and make spaghetti sauce, and I can add stuff to it. Right. But it's a little more work with the smaller tomatoes, but
it's all the skins you have to take off.
I I cheat. I cook them down in the crock pot until they're really mushy. And then I hit them with an immersion blender,
Yeah.
a stick blender,
Yeah.
and that pulls a lot of the skins off.
I've done that. And then sometimes, and then if you get tiny, tiny flecks, sometimes I sieve it, sometimes I leave them in. Depends how skin is.
Yeah, I usually don't strain it because it's going to turn into something else anyway. And it just adds a little more texture to the eventual soup.
Yeah. I'm not anything like you on being self-sufficient, but I do get quite excited at breakfast. My husband's not bothered, but for me, I get excited because I think I'm eating, because I make my own bread, I make my own marmalade, I've got the eggs from the chickens, I make my own granola, I make my own yogurt, and I sit there with everything all made from scratch. And I think, oh, when I was young, I always thought, wouldn't that be a dream to do that? And now I do it all the time. So I congratulate myself.
And now here's the question. Did you ever watch the old series, The Good Life, growing up?
I didn't know whether you had it in the States, but yeah.
They changed the title over here and called it Good Neighbors because apparently there was another series called The Good Life.
Did you have the same? Did you have the same people, Felicity Kendall?
Yeah, it was the same series. They just changed the graphics at the front of it.
Yeah.
I actually have the DVDs of it now. It's comfort viewing. But I love that show, and I didn't it was another one of those things where I didn't realize how possible it was, and just decided, all right, it's a little unrealistic. And if I was going to do that, I probably wouldn't turn on a dime on my 40th birthday and say I'm going to be self-sufficient tomorrow. I'm a bit more of a planner.
Good reading. It's in the script, as my husband.
Yes. Yes, I'm a bit more of a planner. I'm not a plotter, but I am a planner. It's nice seeing somebody else who's watched that, because that's just, if I've had a bad day, it's like, I need a little Tom and Barbara. They'll make me feel better.
Well, it was growing up. There wasn't much on the TV growing up, so that was just a regular Friday night sitcom. So if you're in the England, I mean, that was what everybody watched, really.
We got it on our public television stations. Usually they were Sunday evenings. It'd be like an hour of British sitcoms. Yeah. So my favorite pairing was that, and then To the Manor Born.
Oh, good. Penelope Keith in both.
I love her.
Yeah. So shall we go on to your
book? My last one, which is part of the series, but I will stick with book one. It's Game of Kings by Dorothy Dunnett. Yet again, historical. Actually, though, only 3 out of my 5 books were historical. So yay me. I've broadened out a little bit, but those were books I didn't read those until probably 2002. It's a series of 6 called The Lyman Chronicles, but I was given the entire series by a friend. She knew I liked historical fiction, and she sent me a box for Christmas. She's like, somebody recommended these and they're totally not my style. She read hysterical romances, not just historical romance, but the Bodice Rippers with the Fabio guys on the covers. And she's like, these are not that. And I'm like, okay, I'll read that, but I definitely like the sound of these. And they were tough. The first book, I didn't like the main character for, I'd say, at least the first 100 pages. Not sympathetic, anti-hero to a degree that was very uncomfortable to read. I mean, he set his mother's house on fire with her in it. For reasons that you find out later. And his mother had no problem with it because she understood the reasons, but the reader does not. And I got to the end of the book, and I mean, by the end of it, I understood the reasoning for a lot of this, and I had some empathy for him, though I still wanted to smack him sideways. And I got to the end of the first book, and I'm like, oh, good. I don't have to read any more of this. I can tell her I read it, and I'll tell her the writing was wonderful, because it was. I mean, Dorothy Dunnett does not talk down to her reader. She makes you work for it. She does. There are no footnotes to her foreign languages. There are obscure poems in Old Scots and French, and thankfully somebody did eventually make a companion book to these, so you could have little potted biographies of all the real figures and translations. But for the first time I read them, I did the whole series on context, and I finished Game of Kings, put it down, went, oh good, that's enough of that. And about 2 hours later, I'm like, I wonder what the second book's like. And I opened the second book and I didn't stop reading the Lyman Chronicles until I finished book 6.
Whoa.
And that included a few strategic trips to the restroom at my job because I was reading on the train and I got to a really good point and I had to go into the office and I'm like, how soon can I like duck out of here?
Wow.
And they're amazing books. They're like very densely plotted. They span the time period that I'm interested in, but from a different angle. The other reason I wasn't sure I would enjoy them was because they started out in Scotland, and I like my Tudor history from the British side of the border. And this was the rough wooing, and Mary Queen of Scots is a child being taken away to France, and then all of the drama, but it spreads out to France and Turkey and Russia and all these random other places that it turned out the author dragged her husband, because she wrote these in the days before the internet.
Mhm.
And even before a lot of books existed that she could find things on. So she decided she was going to travel and learn all this stuff, which I think probably is what makes them have such a wonderful sense of place, which is something I'm really still working on. I sometimes feel like I write everything in like a white room, and then I have to come in later and fill in the furnishings or the locations, because I feel like I'm stronger on story and character than I am on description. So I leave myself notes all over my manuscript as to what I feel like I'm missing. But she was a master class in just not dumbing things down. If, let people stop and look things up if they want to. I'm always kind of pleased when somebody says, I had to stop and Google a word. Like, yay, I like that. I occasionally have to stop and Google some of my words, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to use them.
I Google for the spelling constantly.
Yes. I just finished editing the audiobook for A Wider World, and I'm very fortunate. I used to work with a local theater group doing costuming and things for them. So I had a lot of currently COVID unemployed actor friends who were willing to learn how to do audiobooks for their future employment and costume barters later on. But the actor who just read A Wider World has a British wife, and I was so excited because I didn't think I would have to help him with some of the pronunciations as much as I did for the first one. And for the most part, he was spot on, except for like one of the main characters. But we ended up sorting that out. He would do like 2 chapters, send it to me. I would listen to it, edit it down, edit out all the mistakes, and then just send him back the few sentences that need to be reread. And he would send them back, and I would cut and paste them in like it was a Word document. It was an interesting process to learn.
Fascinating. And you're so lucky to have access to these to actors to do that, and the facility to do it. But also I really admire you that you picked up the skill of doing it and all that you had to learn, because it must have taken a lot.
I learned a lot on the first book that I was able to apply on the second. I'm not a big fan of technology, but I will learn it then when I need to. You were my first official Zoom call after how many months of pandemic when the world was on Zoom? I did one brief one earlier today to make sure everything worked. But other than that, I managed to get entirely through COVID without having a Zoom meeting with anybody.
Lucky you. Mind you, I had some nice times meeting up with old school friends and things that kept us going, but we did all get a bit zoomed out, as it were.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to trying it again now, because some of my writing friends are not in the States and there's no chance I'm going to be able to get together with them. So this is an option. I mean, Twitter has actually been my saving grace throughout this whole thing, because I have a lot of close writing friends on there. And we've spent far too much time, picking over plot and character and, well, why do we think this would happen? And, oh, I love it when he does that. You need to do that in your next book again. Fantastic. So it's like having a little, direct message writing group.
It's wonderful. I think Twitter's amazing. I've just been so impressed by the writing community. And I've met
you've
people
added to it.
Friends.
You've definitely added to it. I have my standard appointment now with you on Friday.
Thank you. I love Friday Salon. It's great fun. I do run out of ideas. So when we finished recording, I'm going to pick your brains to start thinking.
Okay.
So to people who aren't familiar with Friday Salon, it's on Twitter. It's hashtag Friday FRI Salon. And anybody can join us and join in our Twitter chat by using the hashtag. And it's 4 p.m. British summertime and it's 11 a.m. EST, isn't it?
And it's a lovely little get together every week. There's a core group who shows up every time, but other people wander in and out. And it's always, I love finding out how people do things, because none of us work the same way. And that's one of the best things about this, is realizing that there's no right way or wrong way. And I get a lot of suggestions from seeing how other people do things.
Yeah, it's great. It's really good having the support of other writers.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, and so when you were reading Game of Kings, where are we in your life now? What sort of age are you?
I was in my mid-30s. I had just recently bought a house. I was single. I didn't know a lot of people in my new neighborhood yet, and a long-term relationship was winding down. So it was a lovely escape from a time when, that's one of the things books have always been, I think, for most of us, is a place to go when reality is not always at its peak. Mm-hmm. So it gave me a place to go. And it also really gave me a kind of a kick in the pants to get back to writing, which I had let lapse between just the stress of moving and the relationship stuff and all that. You put it aside for a week and all of a sudden you realize it's been 3 months before you've thought of words, and then you have to think your way back into the process. Mm-hmm. But really good inspirational historical fiction will get me there every time. Excellent. And these were really helpful. There's a whole other series that she did, and I got those and I saved them for like the next year. I didn't want to eat them all at once.
Excellent. Okay, well, we've come to the end now. So I've just got one question left to ask you, and that is the luxury that you will have on Castaway Island.
Well, since I'm assuming that I'm not going to have electricity, is there such a thing as a solar-powered coffee maker with an unlimited supply of caffeine? Because you're giving me the notebook and the pens. I need fuel.
Okay, you can use one of those bike things that you cycle to generate the electricity, and then you can
that works. I'll take that.
Excellent.
And not be separated from my caffeine.
No, I'd have to have my coffee machine. I love my coffee machine. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Karen. It's really lovely to see you on Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this week's episode of Castaway Books. References for all of the books discussed in this show can be found on my website, which is www.abrakdeborah.wordpress.com. It's the letter K and then my name, Deborah, Deborah. So until next week, goodbye.